Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, one and all. Thank you for joining us on the first episode in 2026 of Wise Women and Good Men. We apologize for being a few minutes late. We had a little bit of a glitch with LinkedIn, and fingers crossed we haven't lost our audience. However, you'll note that after the conversation, this will be uploaded onto my website, www.dianapetersonmore.com, no hyphens, and into LinkedIn. And our guests might even be able to share it with her group of friends and colleagues and clients as well. So I'm so excited. This year, we're launching Leaders on Leadership, and our first guest is solo. We've had a wise woman and a good man in each previous LinkedIn Live conversation. I guess it's essentially a podcast, but we have Dr. Sarah Smith Orr today. And the reason we have her is because she's done it all. Do you know that in 2024, the last time there were stats, there were 1.1 million companies, associations, individual practitioners who were leadership consultants. And I thought, wow, I had no idea. How do you know who to pick and why? Well, I thought Sarah's a great person to launch our series because she's done it all. She herself has led large organizations. She's had a consulting firm throughout. She went back to school and got a PhD. She has been a university professor. She was head of a group in one of the local universities, which she'll describe a little bit more. So, who better than Sarah Smith Orr, who has done it all? So, Sarah, welcome. So glad that you could be here.
Oh,
And and we're so eager to hear from you and learn from you. So I kind of gave the briefest of top level bio. So dive in a little bit more. Tell us a little bit about you and what led you to the leadership space.
oh, deep breath. Well, actually, let me just reframe how I want to
Abs-
respond to the question. And
Absolutely.
just
Yeah.
say that probably about 2 decades ago, maybe a little bit longer, I went through a process of doing my autobiography for myself and
Hmm.
say, where have I been? What have I done? What have been the common themes or the threads that have held each chapter of my life together? And I ended up with three themes that were primary themes. One was education, a second was community, and the third was leadership, not in that sequential order. It was just those were the three. So I then reflect back to my childhood, and my parents were both educators, but we lived on a working farm. And I was the oldest girl. There were four children, and I was the oldest girl. And therefore, and my mother was, she was legally blind with a 10% vision. And even though she taught special education as well as primary grades, she depended upon me and she had to ride the bus back and forth to school. She depended on me, and the family did, for me and from the time I was about 9 years old, to start preparing dinner and cooking and taking a leadership role in my home. Well, that moved on to
Oh,
as I moved into my college years and in the community work, I moved into leadership roles. I just naturally felt comfortable there. And so throughout my life, I've been involved in different leadership roles and then began later in my life to study leadership and then to teach leadership. So leadership has been a primary theme. The second has been community because I've always felt, I read early on, and I've always felt that community was that third leg for us,
mhm.
democracy. And I wanted to be involved in working with organizations in the community. So as you noted, I've founded organizations, and they've been in the social sector. I've provided leadership in those organizations, some very large and raising a whole lot of money, millions of money. And but that continues to be a theme in my life. I volunteer, I'm on boards, I do all kinds of work that supports community. And community can be defined in many ways. And education, I've always had this thirst for learning. I read something very, very early in my life that said, if you're not learning, you're not growing. If you're not growing, you're dying. And it didn't mean you're doing a physical death, but you're doing a cognitive kind of death. You don't really grow and move into more advanced places in your life to gain that wisdom unless you continue learning. So if I may, that's my bio in a different kind of way.
Wow, that is very impressive. It's interesting that you went back to childhood and realized that you had a leadership role in your family, and it makes me realize that I paralleled that. I actually have an older sister. I'm the second, and then a younger sister and brother. And although I did go to law school at some point in my life, when my it brings me to the point that when my parents actually had a trust, which was unusual, the Moore Family Trust. And they wrote it when I was still a late teenager. And even then, they named each other as executors, but I was the fallback person. And when I didn't read that until years later when both of my parents passed away, but I thought, wow, they must have noticed. And they never really talked about it. They never necessarily encouraged it, but they must have noticed that in me. So wow, that's so interesting. By the way, the other thing that just occurred to me, the Orr part of your surname. Do you want to tell us a little bit about Vern Orr, your former spouse, who
Oh, certainly.
older than you, but he was an impressive and important person that I'm sure that impacted your leadership capabilities as well. So take it away, Sarah.
Well, Vern was the Secretary of the United States Air Force and had other roles in leadership in the political realm, but not in governmental realm, I should say, not politically. He never ran for office, but
Mhm.
he was appointed to different positions in the state of California. He's the Director of Finance, Director of Motor Vehicles, and not in that order. Was right-hand person to Ronald Reagan when he was governor. And then when Ronald Reagan was president, he became the leader of the United States Air Force. And I guess, one of the things that was important for me in terms of the relationship with Vern was the, and he was a very equitable and wonderful person, was that I never had to prove myself with him. There was never a sense of competition with him in our relationship. He was my greatest champion. He was ready to support me in anything that I wanted to do, except run for office. He did not want me. He didn't
But
want
you
me to
did.
run for
You
office.
ran for
I did
office.
once, and I think he was crossing his fingers I wouldn't run. I mean, I wouldn't win. And as it turned out, it was best I didn't because I then needed to take care of him because he had open heart surgery, and then my mother was in a situation that was not healthy for her, and I ended up bringing her back to Pasadena, and so I had my hands full. I could not have done it, but
Yeah.
experience. But anyway,
And
but
we think of Vern
he was
every
a great mentor and supporter.
That's wonderful. And he was a great man. And we think of him every single year on January 1st during the Rose Parade because the stealth bomber flies by. And Vern was responsible for that stealth bomber. So I always look up and send him a little prayer and best
Yeah,
wishes wherever he is.
I'm sure he appreciates it.
Meanwhile, back on leadership, of the if any of our listeners are considering becoming a leadership consultant, whether in a large firm, a small firm, or some other configuration, what advice do you have? How do people distinguish themselves from the 1.1 million who are out there?
Well, let me give you a little personal history on that. And that
Sure.
is, I left the large organizations that I was leading. One was United Way in Los Angeles, and I was a vice president. I wasn't the president, but I was a vice president for a fairly significant part of the organization. And I decided I'd outgrown those roles and I wanted to start my own consulting business. And I figured I had enough experience in running organizations and leading organizations and being in community, I could do it. So I started my consulting business, and after about, I'm thinking maybe 5 years, I I connected with a woman who was interested in partnering with me. And I thought, oh, cool. She had come from another community, another state, had been in leadership roles in the community, and even run for office and was, I may have been the mayor, I don't remember what. But I thought, well, cool. She's done all these things. Yes, that would be great to work with her. No. Well, because my concept of leadership, and having studied it and worked in a lot of roles, was not hers. And she ended up getting us into a situation with a client where literally she had to do a citizen uh, she had to arrest someone, and take in an organization that she took on as a client that I was supposed to be a part of. And I went,
Mm,
oh, no, 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 no. And then it continued for another few months because we needed to get ourselves out of this. But I thought, never again, because I hadn't really done my homework. I had
mhm,
really interviewed her in terms of, how do you work? What do you do? Who are your clients? How do you manage a situation like this? And so the words of wisdom, I guess I have based on that experience, was that you need to do your homework. It's not, it's there are going to be all kinds of people that put up their shingle, and
mhm.
they if they've only studied leadership and they haven't lived leadership, it's a big difference. Big difference. And you know that, Diana. Uh, you can't begin to provide the kind of consulting support to an organization if you don't understand people, if you don't understand the kind of situations that they may be a part of. So a consultant really needs to be someone who understands people on organizations,
Mhm.
has lived those experiences in a way that you can count on them to support you in whatever you're doing with you or your organization. So that's my that's my story in terms of, what do you look for? So they're going to list all kinds of things, but the interview process is the most critical. And you
You
really
know,
go with your gut in terms of your sense of how it's going to work.
that's so interesting, Sarah, because actually Sarah and I have known each other in many iterations. When she was vice president at United Way, I happened to have been at a large utility, Southern California Edison Company, and we connected there because Edison's employees were the largest donors in her area. But one of the things I was so lucky to have been involved with is what has become known as skill-based hiring. And so the theory is, you know, past practice is the best indicator of future performance. So rather than say to somebody, as an example, how would you handle an irate customer? You would say, tell us about a situation that you had with an irate customer in the last 6 months. What was it? What was the solution? But you were so right about that because honestly, one of the things that propelled me into self-employment and a consultant was I had a great career at Edison. I was kind of, as you know, made a meteoric rise to the glass ceiling, 18 officers, 17 men and me. And I took a lateral to head the HR function on the enterprise level of a large media company to remain anonymous. I jumped into that position and I thought, gee, everybody's so nice. And I'm much more of a what you see is what you get, which is what Edison was like. Well, all of a sudden I realized that they were several people were stabbing me in the back, left, right, and center. And by the time I realized that that was the nice part was really a different kind of conduct, there was blood in the water. And so I was very, when I left that company, I was sought after, interviewed a lot of chief people officer positions, and I wrote a job description. But I was so fearful of jumping back into a position because the interview process is really a two-way. But one of the good things I happened, I might as well say, I was at Times Mirror. In those days, there was a newspaper group, training companies, book companies. It was a large media enterprise. And there were three training companies, one of which was Zanger Miller, and I became a Zanger Miller trained facilitator and actually took the corporate level, was at the enterprise level, took the whole group of people through frontline leadership. And I really liked that. So I thought, okay, I'm going to get my consulting chops on, and I did, and I turned down a lot of different positions and decided that I wanted to have those consulting chops. And I actually thought at the time I'd go back in and take that last big corporate chief people officer position. And I even wrote a job description. And I said, I wanted to be close to home. I wanted to be strategic. I wanted to be the chief people officer. I want to, have maybe a limited amount of training and travel, excuse me. And the person called up, headhunter, and she said, Diana, perfect position, 2 miles from where you live. It's chief people officer, directly reporting to the CEO. You'd be positioned in Pasadena, but you would also be able to go up to Oakland a few days a week. And it was for Kaiser Permanente, which, by the way, I'm a Kaiser person for my own healthcare. And when I realized that I didn't want that job, I thought, okay, Diana, and I launched. And knock on wood, I was very fortunate that business kind of came my way. And then now it's about networking and, people it's more about who you know as opposed to what you do, like in anything else. But, we all have our own stories. But what, tell us
Well,
about,
wait a minute. I want to go back. You
sure.
found your niche as a
Yeah.
result of that job. So sometimes we have to squeeze the blessings out of the negative experiences we're having.
Yes.
I was part of a toxic organization just before I launched my business. And I thought, I thought I was going to I thought, I didn't know if I was going to survive. Literally, I
Yes.
survive. And
Me too.
and my spiritual mentor, and I can still see it, she'd say, now, Sarah, squeeze the blessings out of it. You'll know when it's time to go. Squeeze the blessings out of it. So I'd go like this, oh, I can't squeeze anymore. And then what it did, though, is it really solidified my direction as I move forward, not only in the consulting way, but to advance my education, because I felt like the next step for me was not only consulting, but I felt like I wanted to teach and be in a situation where I could share my learning, where I could share what I experienced in a way that I could support the growth of others. So that's why I went into the PhD program, and that's a whole nother story.
Well,
But
well, tell us about that. And also, after you had your PhD, you then became head of an organization within that college. So tell us a little bit about that part of your journey.
no, you mean the one that I felt most aligned to at that
Yes.
point? Yes,
Hmm.
because in part because of that toxic situation, I became so focused on supporting women because it was not it was the toxicity was about how that person treated women.
Hmm.
And that was a big part of the toxicity. And so I thought, boy, I've just got to support women and women in leadership. And I connected with a woman who had been a part of an organization in Texas called Leadership Texas. And I met her by chance. And she said, we ought to start a Leadership California. And I said, you're on. What do we want to do? And so the two of us, she is the volunteer and me as the founding executive director, founded Leadership California, which is all about supporting women leaders in the state. And it's an educational program, and it's a year-long program with different segments of focus, for example, political, business, industry, health, finance. And we founded that organization in 1992. And I worked myself out of a job by 1996. Part of it is that for me, leadership begins with yourself and
Hmm.
how you lead yourself and knowing when it's time for you to move on and create a place for others to follow, but knowing when it's time for you to move on. And I had started that organization out of a little office in a house where I lived. People thought we were very professional because that's the way I work, and that we'd been around a long time. But that organization is now 32 years old, and hundreds and hundreds, probably thousands now, of women have moved through that Leadership California experience. Some of them have become CEOs of major companies. One, in fact, that I was close to became the CEO of Campbell Soup's company.
Wow.
And so it was a wonderful organization. It was a wonderful experience. And it sometimes I felt like major part of my body had been cut off when I left. But I knew when it was time to leave, and I knew that it was time to create the space for someone else. In retrospect, I suppose if they'd given me a 6 month kind of sabbatical, maybe I could have renewed myself, but I had no time over for
Hmm.
to renew myself. So those are also some lessons.
I
But
love that, Sarah, that nugget that you just gave us, that leaders need to start by leading themselves, which
yeah,
includes knowing when to hold and when to fold. When do you
yep, that's
stay, when
right.
do you
When to
leave?
play your cards and when not, you know.
Yeah. And by the way, Leadership California led to Leadership Pasadena, that is still going, but that has always been not gender specific. I mean, there's men and there's women. I'm on the email list. I just got an email of the recent class that's graduating. And um, of course, that like many of the nonprofits and organizations in the greater Pasadena area, were very focused on Eaton Canyon. And it was all about what Leadership Pasadena graduates are doing to help the victims of Eaton Canyon fire, which is, by the way, still alive and well. And a little
Yes,
dog I have to my left, who is an Eaton fire refugee, and his mommy is no longer with us. And two of my three children were directly impacted by it. So it's been a very challenging time, but it really allows people to rise up and show their leadership. So,
well, I
Sarah,
was wherever I went, by the way, with United Way, and I was in Midland,
yes.
Texas, and I was in Reading, Pennsylvania, which was a county wide, just
Mhm.
a little bit northwest of Philadelphia. Uh, I started leadership programs wherever I was. And so Pasadena was a natural after Leadership California was to start Leadership Pasadena. So uh, anyway, I have my things out there working.
Well, tell us, there's a couple of things I want to talk about. I want you to give us a couple of examples of leadership projects that kind of started and moved along. I mean, it's great to hear that through Leadership California, one of the women you're close to is now CEO of a large company. But just maybe some other, maybe a small opportunity, a larger one. I know that, like me, you work with a lot of nonprofits, and just kind of interested in hearing about that. Then I'm also interested in hearing about your PhD program per se, what your PhD is in, and what that led you to in terms of just teaching students, because we have one of your former students who's going to be on our program next month, who she herself is a professor. So I don't know what order you want to take, but maybe a couple of examples, but also kind of the cascading effect of both those examples and your PhD.
Well, let me start with the PhD and then I'll
Yeah,
go to the other.
sure,
Uh,
absolutely.
the PhD, it's a door opener.
Mhm.
And you know that. Uh, I decided that if I wanted to teach and if I wanted to be involved in any kind of an educational situation, as well as also the credentials for consulting. It's also nice to have those letters after your name. It gives a strong impression of accomplishment and credibility. So
Yeah.
that was one of the reasons. But how I started though was uh, well, I had decided I was going to do it. I was teaching at the Drucker School in Claremont, and I was invited to teach because I co-edited a book with a colleague at Claremont McKenna College, and he was the director of the Kravis Leadership Institute, which I was a founding board member for, with some very high-profile people whose names I won't rattle off, but really, really high profile people.
Yeah.
And not that I was, but they were. At any rate, and I have a cute story about one of them. Uh, but at any rate, I it was publishing, getting published was the first door open for me, and that was at the Drucker School, because as soon as I had published, and it was on leadership, that they said, "Would you like to teach for us?" And so I started teaching at the Drucker School, and had the opportunity to not only learn from Peter Drucker, but also he never said no to me whenever I asked him if he would be a part of something, whether it was at Leadership California or in my classroom. He never said no, which was incredible because he was a very famous, but also very humble person. Um, so that began my process, and I then moved into. I decided at that point. It was at that point that I decided that I wanted to really move into a PhD, but I did not want to do it at a business school because I didn't want to go through all those other hoops. I'd been on that, I just didn't want to do it. So I went to the School of Education, and I'm sitting here across the desk with the dean of the school, and I had submitted my application. I said, I would like to be, I would like to complete my PhD in your program. And he looked over my resume and he looked at me and he said, "We'd love to have you." I said, "Great, you got me." And that was it, And then I started. What was the wonderful thing about it was, look at, if you want to pursue that, look at what the educational program provides for you as an adult. I call it adult. That is, we've grown up, we've had all these experiences, and we know what we want. And I knew what I wanted. And he said, "You can do it. You can focus on leadership." And I wanted to study social entrepreneurs because, unlike nonprofit leaders who sometimes are caught in this cycle of band-aiding
Mhm.
problems rather than innovative directions, social entrepreneurs are out there doing innovation, and they're just starting things that need to be started and taking on all kinds of challenges to get there. So he let me do it. I did it. And I did it all under this umbrella of the School of Education under the Claremont Graduate University. So that also led me to be invited to, after I'd been on the board, the founding board of the Kravis Leadership Institute, they asked me if I would lead it. And I went, "No, I'm in Santa Fe now. Vern had passed away. My husband had passed away. I don't know." But they said, "We'd like you to do it." So they actually, I said, "I got to live close. I don't want to drive the freeways anymore. I want to live close to the campus." And so I ended up in a college-owned home. I mean, it was just amazing, the opportunities when you kind of position yourself in an authentic and um, authentic way to genuinely grow and advance as an individual and help others advance. So the PhD was really a wonderful experience, and it did provide other opportunities, which is one I want to talk about next, and that's to work in Colombia and in the country of Colombia, and with an organization in Bogota, based in Bogota. And I just had the most incredible experience for 2 years working with this woman who started this education program that became then a part of um, the Ministry of Education's prime program for teaching in rural areas as well as urban areas, but first rural areas, some deep in the Amazon, where she said, I won't take you, you're a gringa, you know? She was there. But but I mean, it was just an amazing experience. So I worked with her to help develop her organization, as well as I worked with her board that had no idea about how we in the US work with nonprofit boards. So I helped
Mm-hmm.
develop the board as well as her staff. So that's kind of a rambling story about PhDs and where it led me. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and also working at Claremont McKenna College as a visiting professor and leading a leadership institute.
Well, I also know, Sarah. Oh, by the way, I wanted to mention when you were talking about Leadership California and being focused on women, I must say, when I started my practice, because I do executive coaching among other things, and I thought I would exclusively be coaching women. Au contraire, I probably have coached over my career more men than women. And interestingly, because, I was a liberal arts major, became an employment lawyer, etc. I find in my I have weaknesses, one of which is I would say the whole financial arena. I have coached more CFOs and people in the whole realm of financial services more than anything else, that and healthcare, which is just kind of interesting. But I love that story about you being in Colombia, and I also know, having spent time traveling in South America, the bane of being a gringa or a gringo. But gosh, did you work with indigenous peoples directly, or did you work kind of exclusively through the woman who was setting up the
I
program?
I worked with her, but I mean, one village high in the Andes, it was over 10,000 feet above sea level. And
Mm-hmm.
the school there was a two-room schoolroom, a schoolhouse. And the parents came on horseback, to
Oh,
support their children. And the children often walked a mile or 2 miles to get to school. And there was one precious little girl who was a Down syndrome at the time,
mhm.
she was mentally handicapped, but she was the highlight of the school. The school, the kids did not feel this their day was complete if that little girl was not there. And how they supported that little girl and her growth and how she blossomed was just an amazing kind of story. So I did go to rural areas with them and the coffee region and the mountains, and it was a fascinating experience. One
Oh yeah.
I loved. And I met the woman through the Kravis Leadership Institute and a prize that she received through a major donor and one who supported significantly the institute. In fact, it was named after him.
Yeah.
And
So the cascading effect of the PhD, but I also know, Sarah Smith Orr, that more recently you have served as an interim CEO, largely for a nonprofit. So I know I
I
have done
forgot
that
about that.
too. Every
I've
time
done
I
that
serve,
as well.
I know, every time I serve as an interim, whether it's, kind of HR or OD or whatever, including um, heads of nonprofit organizations, I always do it 20 hours a week because I want to keep the rest of my practice going, and I've been successful in doing that. So tell us a little bit about that, because I know you went through a program first, which I did not, and then tell us.
Well,
And then
I
it
actually
led to
started
jobs.
with my
Mhm.
consulting business back in the late 90s and early 2000s. I was doing interim executive director work and back in the Los Angeles area and really liked it. My mantra that I had developed probably, I guess, three decades ago when I was doing that autobiography and coming up with my life themes. My mantra is my job is to work myself out of a job. And it's as a consultant, you your job is to support them in their growth and the direction they define rather than
Hmm.
embedding yourself in the organization. I've never embedded myself in an organization. So the interim work was really wonderful for me because I didn't want to be in an organization again like you. I,
Yeah.
by the way, I use that term to feel like we reach points where we need to know that this is not feeding me anymore. And that's the personal leadership part. And so if it's not feeding you, what's happening? Where do you need to go? What do you need to let go of so that you can take on something more? And so my job is to work myself out of a job. My mantra is that it's not to just leave a place, but leave a place at another level of performance, another level of action, however you define it, an individual that way, because I also coach and I have a coaching certificate as well. So
Yes.
anyway, what was your question again?
Well, it was about I know more recently
Oh
you were
yeah,
telling me in the last couple of years you got another certification and we're doing
right.
interim work.
And there's an organization called the Third Sector that did provide that training. I did it only to refresh myself and thought, oh, if there's an opening around Reno, because that's my primary residence right now, even though I have a home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Um, and lo and behold, popped up this opportunity to go up and work in at Lake Tahoe, which is about 50 miles long, winding road, kind of 50 miles up the mountain. And so I worked with the Tahoe Coalition for the Homeless. And that was another
Mm,
wonderful, wonderful experience. You never know what blessings come out of each experience.
yeah.
The opportunity is for you to squeeze blessings out of everything. But
Yeah.
I mean, some of the homeless were just um, the men, particularly, that were had gone through life situations that were tragic and ended up without a
Hmm.
but had a guitar. Used to be a member of a band, and one night I was cooking. I occasionally cook meals for the homeless in the shelter, and when I was up there, and uh, this man pulled out his guitar, he started singing. I went, wow, this is great. Another one went up. You know, those are their belongings they hold tight to and don't let.
Yes.
But the two of them sang together, and I'm thinking, you know, what joy they bring in this singing and music. And yet they were trapped in these situations, whether it was drugs or a bad relationship or losing their home,
Hmm.
whatever, and alcohol, which all play into all of these experiences of the homeless. So it was a neat experience, and did work myself out of a job there and moved on.
Yeah, one of the things that I did, having been, in a law firm and then recruited to a company that was bringing the labor law practice in-house, et cetera, and then going to another very large enterprise, that there were consultants abounded, shall we say. And one of the things that I noticed was that they didn't always treat the in-house individuals particularly well. And I recognize that as a consultant, sometimes you are accorded greater knowledge, experience, and I always partner, especially if I brought into an HR related organization, which happens, I always say to the person, I've been in your chair, I understand what's happening, and I'm your advocate. So tell me, I'm sure you know as much as I do about what's going on, and you have the unique experience of just of the culture of this organization. What are the points you want me to make? And then forming that relationship is so important as a consultant because yes, in general, you are considered special. You're considered to have expertise that others do not have. It may be true, it may not be true, but it's so important to treat those you're working or partnering with respect.
And also with an understanding that you're not there to replace them.
Oh my
There,
word, it's
you're there to
10:42.
support. I know, I know.
We're
I was looking at time and I was going,
I
whoops,
know.
we don't have very much more time left.
I know. What I do want to say, and Sarah's going to be able to help on this. Next month, we're going to focus on leaders on leadership, the professorial perspective. We have a male and a female. The wise woman is Dr. Sonia, and Sarah's going to tell us her surname because I don't want to botch it.
Sure, fulfilled.
Yes, and she was a former student of Sarah's.
At
And then we
college.
have Peter Giulioni. And I know them both. I know Peter more so than Sonia, but they both have interesting perspectives about what they're doing as professors. And even though Sarah has has those experiences as well, each of them is focused on that. In Peter's case, he led the Marshall School at University of Southern California, and then he ended up, in fact, he still does. I think he teaches at SUNY, whatever, SUNY, of
Yeah.
whatever, the State University of New
Yeah,
York.
that's a year.
But he also was teaching abroad in Singapore for 3 years and kind of
That's
coming
what
back and forth.
I
But he, like Sarah, has been a leader and has worked in the leadership field before he moved into it. He does not have a PhD, whereas Sonia does. So I want to thank you so much, Sarah, for
thank you.
launching our first episode of Leaders on Leadership. And boy, the nuggets, the things that you've said, I really like the importance of really haven't really thought about it this way, leading yourself, knowing when to hold, when to fold, when to move on, when to move yourself outside of a job. And Sarah is very willing to talk to anybody who's listening. For those who were not able to hear it, it will be uploaded onto my website and then to the YouTube channel later today. So, Sarah, you can feel free to give your email address, or people can contact me and I can give it to them. Up to you. So,
Oh, they can contact me through LinkedIn.
out
They can
through
find
LinkedIn
my LinkedIn.
as well.
Yes.
Okay. Well, I think it is now 10:45. So thank you so
Yes.
much, Sarah.
Thank you,
See you
Diana. It's
soon.
been a pleasure.
Take care.
All right, you too.
Bye
Bye.
bye.